In the early days of motion pictures, innovators often experimented with various types of dimensional stop-motion animation, and they sometimes used modeling clay to make simple, malleable characters that could come to life. In 1932, one such pioneer, an Oregon filmmaker named Lewis Clark Cook, made a clay animated film called The Little Baker. However, 2D cell animation got an early foothold and quickly became the norm for animation. By the 1940s and 50s, 2D drawn animation was the dominant form, with TV shows and theater presentations created by hundreds of small and large cell animation practitioners. Model animation, or three-dimensional animation, was largely denigrated and rarely seen. By the 1960s, clay animation was completely maligned, called impractical and not suited for animation. Toward the end of the 60s, Will Vinton, a native Oregonian from McMinnville, was studying architecture and filmmaking at the University of California at Berkeley. There, he experimented with stop-motion animation, including object animation and pixelation. His interest in organic fluid forms and the architecture of Antoni Gaudí in Barcelona led Will to begin designing with plasticine clay. The filmmaking and the clay sculpting combined for creative experiments in clay animation.
My fellow Americans.
It was upon first viewing these experiments that Will Vinton had an epiphany about the potential of clay and 3D animation.
That's just a mind blower.
He felt this was something that clearly deserved further exploration. In the early 70s, while working full-time as a filmmaker in Portland, Will decided to continue the experiments in clay animation. He wanted to make a film that would show off the merits of this unique but unproven medium and hopefully show others the potential he saw in it. He invited his college housemate and sculptor, Bob Gardner, to join him at his house in Portland to help. They set up a small shooting stage in the basement of Will's home and began animating.
I wonder what makes it work.
An 8-minute clay animated film was completed in 1974, called Closed Mondays.
Thank you for turning me on. I am a replica of the Model 505 Type C electro-brain.
The film garnered hundreds of international awards and captured the first ever Academy Award Oscar for a stop-motion film.
Come hoist your mug and join your stand.
After making a commercial for Rainier Beer, Will and Bob went their own ways to work on separate projects. Will used the commercial's mountain backdrop for his next film, Mountain Music. Vinton followed this with a more ambitious half-hour film called Martin the Cobbler, based on a Tolstoy short story for non-theatrical distributor Billy Budd Films in New York. For the general public, interest was growing in what seemed like a new animation technique that Will Vinton and his associates were exploring. To help satisfy this interest, the team created a documentary to describe the basics of their process. They called it Claymation. It was a word Will coined and later trademarked to differentiate his work from that of other clay animators that came before. The modest success of these first films created the opportunity to continue making claymation films for non-theatrical and educational distribution. For Vinton, what followed was an exciting series of experimental short films, each designed to explore the capabilities of claymation and move the medium forward.
But when Rip entertained, he always drew a crowd.
There are men, special men, born to rule.
Where I live, everything is very small.
This experimental period was creative and satisfying. and Will built a solid team of artists dedicated to the advancement of claymation and 3D animation. Architect turned animator Barry Bruce began a 25-year period working with Will as the backbone of this 3D animation journey.
The chain of life had begun. It was a process of trial and error. Some were swift and some were strong, but one of them was clever.
And it came to pass on a Christmas evening, while all the doors were shut tight.
And quicker than God could drop his hand, fishes and fowls and beasts and birds swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forests and the woods, and split the air with their wings.
Indeed, these claymation films showed off an impressive range of 3D animation techniques and styles.
And God said, "That's good."
The word dinosaur means terrible lizard. Actually, they weren't lizards at all. They were reptiles. What happened to them, Philip? They died.
Significantly, Vinton was also experimenting and learning all about more sophisticated adult comedy and breathing life into characters in a way that had rarely been done in 3D animation up to that point.
The largest of the giant dinosaurs was a plant eater.
Roosevelt, day of infamy.
This generation of Americans has a rendezvous with...
Oh, Frankie.
He had a mistress, And then there were the movies. Training. The two brothers, they're fighting, they're always fighting.
I'll break your face. Take this, boy. You run. I'll hit that. Take that.
Well, they're getting in shape for the war. They feel good about that. Well, then they go to the bar and drink on furlough, right? And they fight the Air Force, they fight the Navy and everything.
Your mother.
Of course, there's no Coast Guard. Oh, and then, of course, back home, there was the Andrews sisters singing Bugle Boy of Company C.
The films won hundreds of international awards, including 4 Academy Award nominations in a 7-year period.